Okay, talking about trade, it's important to be familiar with some important vocab words. Imports refers to goods that are produced abroad to another countries and then sold here domestically or in the US. And exports is the opposite. So the goods are produced domestically, meaning here in the US, and they're sold abroad to other countries. In this act of learning, I want you to consider or suppose that the U.S. exports 700 tons of wheat to Japan, and we import 110 computers from Japan. Japan imports 700 tons of wheat, and they're exporting 110 computers. So the opposite of what the U.S. is doing. So consider A, first of all, how much of each good is consumed in the U.S. And I want you to plot this combination on the U.S. PPF. And then how much of each good is consumed in Japan. And plot this combination on Japan's PPF. Our last active learning activity showed us that there are gains from trade, but where do those gains come from? There's an important concept that's called absolute advantage. Absolute advantage refers to the ability to produce a good using fewer inputs than another producer. The U.S. has an absolute advantage in wheat. Producing a ton of wheat uses only 10 labor hours in the US versus 25 labor hours in Japan. So because it takes us less time to produce the same amount of wheat, we have what's called an absolute advantage. The US also has an absolute advantage in computers, and that's because producing one computer requires 125 labor hours in Japan, but only 100 labor hours in the US. So the US has an absolute advantage in both goods. So why does Japan specialize in computers, and why do both countries effectively gain from trade? Two countries can gain from trade when each country specializes in the good that it's producing at the lowest cost. So looking again, we're looking at two different types of costs. Absolute advantage measures the cost of a good in terms of the inputs, and the other measure of cost is referred to as opportunity costs. And this concept of opportunity costs is very important. The opportunity cost of a computer is the amount of wheat that could be produced using the labor needed to produce one computer. So in other words, if you were going to produce wheat instead of a computer or computers instead of wheat, what would you be giving up? So comparative advantage means that a country would have the ability to produce a good at a lower opportunity cost than another producer. The principle of comparative advantage says that each good should be produced by the individual that has the smaller opportunity cost of producing that good. So effectively, that country will specialize according to this concept called the comparative advantage. So let's look at the opportunity cost of a computer. The opportunity cost of a computer is 10 tons of wheat in the US. So producing one computer requires 100 labor hours, which instead could produce 10 tons of wheat. 5 tons of wheat in Japan would require producing one computer that requires 120 labor hours, which instead could be used to produce 5 tons of wheat. So Japan has a comparative advantage in computers because they have a lower opportunity cost in that good. Gains from trade arise from comparative advantage. So we're going to be doing several or taking a look at different examples where there are differences in opportunity costs, and you'll be able to determine which country has a lower opportunity cost. When each country specializes in the good and where they have a lower opportunity cost, or otherwise called a comparative advantage, total production in all countries is higher. Or another way of saying that is the world's economic pie is bigger and all countries gain from trade. Let's consider this active learning where you're going to look at both absolute and comparative advantage. So you're looking at Argentina, which has 10,000 labor hours per month, and they can produce either coffee or wine. And Brazil, which has 10,000 labor hours per month, and they can produce coffee or wine. Based on the inputs and how long it's going to take each country to produce each of the goods, I want you to determine which country has an absolute advantage, so they're using less hours to produce each good, and which country has a comparative advantage, where their opportunity cost is lower.